Good afternoon. Good afternoon. I'm Andy Lenehan, President of the City Club of Portland. Welcome to City Club and to our program today on the Oregon Business Plan. I have a few items of City Club business as usual before we start, and then we'll begin our program. Next Friday, July 4th, there'll be no program. Enjoy a safe and enjoyable July 4th weekend. Today marks a milestone in the club's history. This forum is the last that the club's executive director of 13 years, Nancy Hedin, will attend as executive director, and it's the first forum attended by our new executive director, Wendy Rodmacher-Willis. Last night, many club members toasted Nancy Hedin and wished her the best at a farewell party at the Benson Hotel. Nancy, would you stand up so we can give you a round? Now I'd like to invite Wendy Rodmacher-Willis to the podium to introduce herself.
Thank you, Andy. After 4 days in this position, I'm the luckiest woman in Portland. Since I started as your new executive director on Monday, under Nancy's patient tutelage, I might add, I've participated in a lively and very sophisticated conversation about stabilizing school funding, an in-depth interview on revitalizing our region's economy, a spirited conversation about assisted suicide, and numerous meetings on the numbers of lunches ordered, the placement of microphones, and the participation level in the annual fund. After only 1 week, I'm here to tell you what you already know. The social contract is alive and well at City Club. Every week, citizens from every corner of this city come together and donate many, many hours of their time with no interest other than the health of the community. And that goodwill is a rare and precious gift to the city of Portland and to the state of Oregon. As many of you know, I'm making the transition from being a practicing lawyer to being your executive director. Some of you may be wondering why I'm making that change. Other than the obvious reasons, I love practicing law, I do. But last November, I woke up the morning after the fall election and I thought, where is the community that I know? This is not the Oregon of my childhood, and this is not the Oregon that we came back to raise our children in. I thought to myself, school funding is in shambles. The state is dividing it along seemingly intractable lines of party and geography, and the public debate has devolved into name-calling and to sound bites. Yet, despite all of that, we live in Portland, and there's so much hope here, and I have great faith in the citizens of Portland and the people of Oregon. So at that point, I felt called to leave the practices law as much as I loved it, and wanted to participate more publicly in the issues facing the community. My criteria were very specific. I wanted to work somewhere where I could be part of the solution and not part of the problem. Imagine my delight about being invited to join the staff of City Club. This is a unique place where the debate is lively, but the discourse is civil. It's here that we can come together as neighbors and citizens, air our differences, and find common ground. It is here that we can look beyond the sound bites and spend the time necessary to understand complex issues. And it's here that we can meet other compassionate, concerned, and need I say brilliant colleagues who can inspire in us the obligations of citizenship. With all of that venerable history and commitment to good works, I can imagine an even brighter future for your City Club. As you've heard Andy and others say over the past few months, City Club, like many other nonprofits in the city, is facing challenging times. I know all of you as members and citizens are committed to ensuring that City Club maintains its strength and vitality in the upcoming years. I also know that you all aspire to a City Club that reaches all members of the community, including members from every neighborhood and from all age groups. I'm here to serve you in that endeavor. I look forward to working together with all of you in supporting City Club's mission of service and ensuring that the club leads the debate in the city. I hope you'll come to me and to your Board of Governors with any ideas and inspirations that you have about the club and what can make it an even more vital force in the community. President Eisenhower is reported to have said, "Politics ought to be the part-time profession of every citizen who would protect the rights and privileges of free people and who would preserve what is good and fruitful in our national heritage." That admonition is at the heart of City Club's work, and I'm proud to be a part of it. Thank you for allowing me to join you.
Thank you, Wendy. I'm sure many of us here will share the mixed feelings of regret that I have that we're losing Nancy, who's provided such wonderful service over 13 years, and excitement that we found Wendy Radmacher-Willis, who's going to bring us new talents and energy. Now on to our main program. For at least 2 years now, the news about Oregon's economy has been a litany of really shameful firsts: highest unemployment, highest hunger rate, etc. The repetition of bad news has caused, I think, some to overlook some positive signs in the state's economy. One of the most positive developments has been the creation of the Oregon Business Plan. With the Oregon Business Council taking the lead, the plan was developed through an unprecedented level of cooperation, drawing on all sectors of Oregon's economy. Over 1,300 participants overflowed the convention center last December when the plan was unveiled. The plan has continued to receive bipartisan support from all levels of government and all sectors of the business community. Here today to tell you about the plan is a panel of business executives who had a critical role in the development and the implementation of the plan. Our moderator today is Ron Timpe, sitting closest to me. He's chairman of the board of Standard Insurance Company and chairman of the Oregon Business Council. His many community activities have included chairing the Portland Metropolitan Area Chamber of Commerce and the 2001 Columbia-Willamette United Way campaign. Next to him is Scott Gibson, who is CEO of Gibson Enterprises. His career in electronics and high tech includes his role as founder and president of Sequent Computer Systems and as an investor and board member in several high tech companies. He has also been chairman of the board of trustees of the Oregon Graduate Institute, and recently the legislature appointed him to the Oregon Council for Knowledge in the Economy, OCED. Charlie Hopewell, who's second from the end, is president of Neilsen Manufacturing, Inc., which provides precision sheet metal and assembly of components for the high-tech industry. His community activities include volunteer work with several Salem organizations, including the school district, the Chamber of Commerce, and higher education. And finally, Curt Roberts, in the blue shirt, is vice president for global strategic planning for Nike, a position he's held since 1999. He was previously chairman and CEO of Peace Health Oregon region, based in Eugene. Broadcast of City Club programs this quarter is made possible in part by contributions from Wells Fargo Bank, Legacy Health Systems, and Weyerhaeuser Company Foundation. We're very grateful for their support. Welcome, Ron.
Thank you, Andy, and thanks to all of you for having us and for having a strong interest in an Oregon economy that is successful. Nancy, we hope that we can make your last forum a good one, and at the same time, Wendy, make your first forum a good one. I was also very pleased to hear that we will engage in civil discourse afterwards. That was a great relief for me. I truly believe that Oregon stands at an economic crossroad. There are changes sweeping the business world, indeed the global free marketplace, and they offer us two choices in my mind. One path presents an Oregon defined by thriving businesses that lead their industries in innovation, market reach, and staying power. And this path heralds a future of well-paying jobs that resist migration and sustain local economies and communities. On the other path, Oregon becomes strictly a regional consumer market and a branch office outpost for industries where key ideas and decisions occur elsewhere. It becomes vulnerable to competitors offshore and cheaper sources of labor and supply. As we say in Stepping Up, the report in front of you, the evidence suggests that many of our companies are taking that higher path, and you might ask, how do we know that? Well, last year, as Andy mentioned, some business people formed an ad hoc group known as the Oregon Business Plan Steering Committee. Our starting point was something many of you are familiar with, the State Strategic Plan, Oregon Shines, which has three broad goals creating quality jobs, creating healthy communities, and creating healthy surroundings. And while all of those are important and clearly interrelated, the Oregon Business Plan decided to focus our efforts on just one thing: creating quality jobs. And within that goal, we started a detailed research project. We consulted with experts, conducted industry focus groups, and held meetings around the state. We also coordinated with many other economic planning efforts currently underway, and drew on data provided by the Oregon Progress Board. A major event, again, Andy mentioned, was that last December, over 1,300 business, community, and political leaders from every county in the state came together at the Convention Center to discuss our draft blueprint for strengthening Oregon's economy in the future. And what did we learn? Well, what we have learned is that across Oregon there are clusters of both traditional and new economy businesses that are at their forefront in their industries in terms of being cutting edge with their products, services, processes, and marketing strategies. Industrial clusters are where there is a critical mass in the areas of their specialty. And they're comprised of not only of the producers, but also the suppliers, the competitors, literally, and the allies who enjoy the proximity of that critical mass and the benefits derived therefrom. At the core of these successful clusters are something we have called traded business sectors. And those are companies that sell their products and services outside the state, bringing in fresh dollars that directly sustain the high-paying jobs, but also getting dollars in the mix and spurring throughout the state growth and good jobs among local suppliers, retailers, and service businesses. So as a broad strategy to revitalize and sustain the economy of Oregon, we should position Oregon in fact and in reputation as a state that is unique in its passion and ability to nurture these traded sector businesses of innovative industries. What we have done in the Oregon Business Plan is to try to develop a framework, and to keep it simple for people like me, we have focused on the 4 Ps for the 5th P is prosperity. And the 4 Ps are mentioned, but in the book that you have, but basically they are the people. And what do we need to do in terms of education, higher education, and K through 12, and even preschool education. Another one is place, to make sure we have good land use policies, are using our forests appropriately, and those kinds of things. Another P is productivity. In today's world, each business is facing critical needs to become productive. And the last P, we had to work a little bit. We wanted the word innovation, but it didn't begin with a P, so we said pioneering innovation, which really brings almost a better spirit to it. So we have those 4 Ps that are really then serving as a foundation for 12 initiatives. And the initiatives have several parts. The initiatives are described in the Stepping Up book that was handed out, so I'm not going to go into those 12 initiatives. But one thing I like is not only are the initiatives there, stated broadly, the subparts of what we need to do, and then how are we doing against those 12 initiatives so far this year. I think I'd now like to turn to the panelists who will bring you interesting stories from their perspective about their businesses and how it relates to moving along in terms of a prosperous Oregon. So I'll turn it over to Scott, and we'll just move right on down in the order that you're seated.
Thank you, Ron. It's great to be here. Thank you to you all for having us. I'm representing the high-tech industry, as I am chairman of Radisys Corporation and on several other public high-tech boards, TriQuint and Pixelworks, and one high-tech private company that's just getting started, Thetis. High-tech is the #1 industry in Oregon. Many of you know that, measured by either employment or exports. And we're one of only 4 states in the country that actually can say that. The others may surprise you. Of course, Washington, Texas, Georgia, which is a little bit of a surprise, and not California. Actually, healthcare is the largest industry and employer in California. So what about high tech right now? Well, it's no secret that it's in the worst recession really since 1974. And that was my first recession, and it was a doozy. And this one is absolutely competitive in terms of employment, in terms of what's happened to companies. And there's only a few exceptions. A couple of high-tech companies in our state that supply to hot consumer areas or consumer areas in demand, like Pixelworks, are seeing increased revenue. But there it's a battle between prices going down almost as fast as unit shipments are going up. This is also the worst environment for startups that I've ever seen, and that's talking over a 30-year period of young companies being financed. This is due predominantly to a shortage of syndicates. So we have some of the money here, but we can't get the other companies from California or Seattle to join in a syndicate. And that's the only way young companies are being funded right now, is through the forming of a syndicate. It used to be venture capitalists wanted the deal all for themselves. Now it's the opposite. They wouldn't dare go into a deal all by themselves. So I'm seeing good, deserving companies dying at a rate that I've never seen. And the nature of startups is some deserve to die. Their business model doesn't pan out, but many are dying unnecessarily in our state. From Aradis's perspective, we supply complex systems, including software, to 3 large segments. Communications service providers, Nokia being the largest we supply, enterprise equipment providers like Nortel and Avaya, and commercial equipment providers, particularly medical equipment and industrial automation. Our communication service provider customers, who supply infrastructure equipment to wireless service providers like AT&T Wireless or Vodafone or Verizon, have seen their business decline for the 3rd straight year. Yet we still have more drop calls, busy signals are up. So why aren't those suppliers expanding their networks? It's really because they have a debt overhang. They use so much debt to expand their businesses in the boom times that now it's very tough for them to find the capital to expand their business, despite the fact that subscriber growth is still there. We keep hoping that all of you will buy the phones that access your Microsoft Outlook or your data on your desktop, and that's not happening so far. The color screens we've tried to romance you with, the data, access to data, pictures you can take of yourself. I mean, some of your children are reacting to that, but you have not yet. So please go out and buy one of those phones immediately. This is a huge opportunity for Radisys to, because of this downturn, to sort of turn a lemon into lemonade, building much more of the equipment that our customers formerly built. And that's as a result, as I said, of this, the downsizing. Our customers have laid off so many engineers, they need Radisys now to build more and more of the systems they used to build. So the good news is, after establishing profitability, or reestablishing profitability, I should say, we're beginning to cautiously hire again. The bad news is most of those jobs are in Shanghai, due to 1/5 of the cost with similar quality of even engineers, so these aren't manufacturing people. Let's look at TriQuint now, speaking from the perspective of a board member there. TriQuint is also expanding in China, both from selling to customers there as well as doing some back-end manufacturing. 45% of our business is those handsets that you haven't bought. Our largest customer is Samsung. Some of you have Samsung handsets, who is Korean, but that company does more and more and more of their design and manufacturing in China. The balance of TriQuint's business is satellite communications, defense radars, wireless broadband, and now optical communication semiconductors. I'll bet on the communications business long term, I'm not making a stock recommendation, as internet traffic is still growing rapidly. Internet traffic is still growing about 50% compounded per year, and that will mean that it's only a question of when these markets expand, not a question of if, thank goodness. Pixelworks, again, from a perspective of a board member. Pixelworks has been growing during the recession as consumers and businesses around the world have kept buying projectors and flat panel displays. In fact, in Europe, The projector is now the new television because it can project video, and because of space constraints, Europeans are now putting their TV away in a little cupboard, taking it out at night, and projecting a beautiful high-definition television image on a wall, and that's their high-definition television because space is so precious. The high-definition flat-panel TV business is the next big thing, and Pixelworks is extremely well-positioned. China is everything for Pixelworks. We are trying to reinvent ourselves as an Asian company. More and more of our customers are in China making projectors, flat panel monitors, and advanced televisions, and selling them not just in China, but increasingly into the USA through Walmart and similar distribution channels. So what do these businesses need from Oregon right now, or what could be done to revitalize the Oregon high-tech economy? Well, the good news is all recessions end, and this one will too. And with a little bit of hope, I think we're seeing just the beginnings of an ending to that recession. So a few examples of things that could be done. I believe very strongly that most of the job growth, you heard me go through 3 important companies to the area, and I was somewhat saying that there probably won't be a lot of job growth from those companies in the state of Oregon. So that could be, on one hand, taken as distressing. Yet it's the startup companies, it's the young companies who haven't yet expanded and aren't looking for that last nickel and dime of cost efficiency, or who are now competing against established competitors. They're the ones who really have to be global companies. Startups usually don't start that way, and yet their employment growth can just rocket. I remember Sequent, we started with 18 people. Joanne, you're out there, one of the co-founders. We started with 18 people. We were 2,000 people within 4.5 years. And most, 90% of them were in Oregon. If we had not sold to IBM and were still around, you'd see most of that company's job expansion in China or in Europe or in other places. So it's the young companies that generally derive job growth around the headquarters, because their great new thing is all designed and manufactured, and there's so much change that it has to be done locally. So Oregon must give emphasis to tax policies and legislation which brings more venture capital, more of these syndicates we're missing, into our state. Senate Bill, ACAD has sponsored Senate Bill 362, and other great citizens have sponsored House Bill 3613, and both of these are sort of a 1-2 punch that would do more to bring venture capital into this state than anything I've ever seen. And by the way, these have zero budget impact so that they're not trading off for anything, because they're only bringing people who don't live here and sending them to come here now. Oregon has a location advantage with respect to the Far East. We should mine that more aggressively. Direct flights to Shanghai would be a great example, just as the direct flights to Frankfurt, and I just returned on one 2 days ago. It's absolutely essential. The difference it makes to save 6 hours each way on a commute is really sizable. More Mandarin Chinese culture, language training, and a bigger welcoming mat. We need to go after China the way we did Japan and the semiconductor companies in the 1980s. And this time it's different. We're not going after their manufacturing. We're going after selling them on how we can be their distribution arm. India is very important for the software and the back office outsourcing opportunities. LiveBridge, one of my companies, has an Indian partner working with us on all our back office outsourcing services. And Intel has announced thousands of software engineers in Bangalore, India. Number 3, Oregon needs to nurture and grow the next big new things to diversify our economy. These new areas must be ones with substantial world-class existing resource which underlie this big new thing. The large arena of bioscience, anchored by Dr. Kohler and OHSU's outstanding innovation and growth, would be one example. The Oregon Opportunity, which will have $200 million from the state and $300 million from private donations, is the kind of catalyzation needed around OHSU to birth new companies, find new cures, and attract existing companies to locate here. Another example of a potential big new thing would be addressed in Senate Bill 360, which has been dubbed Oregon Opportunity 2. This is the area of micro to nano multi-scale devices. Now, you don't have to know what those are, but they're a big new thing. We have world-class research here in Oregon being done at Hewlett-Packard with print heads. The technology that's in print heads turns out is a multi-scale device. FEI, Xerox, Intel, TriQuint, and it turns out Oregon State and University of Oregon. This consortium has banded together with Pacific Northwest Labs to create a micro to nano center. HP has loaned some great space to support what we hope will be a state contribution of bonding dollars, not budget dollars, bonding dollars, to create a building for this center. Our 2 senators in Washington, D.C. are also working to secure federal funds to catalyze our efforts. This could build an entire new industry here with the resultant startups and growth we saw from the semi-industry from the 70s and 80s. In summary, the number of leaders awakening to the needs of our state has increased due to the recession and the change in political leadership in our state. Crisis does create some opportunity. There are still those who want to keep our state the same as it has been. The next 3 weeks in the legislature are crucial as the governor's office and the legislature try to pick 5 or 6 bills which can make a difference in our economy. Please help them to pick Senate Bill 360, 362, and House Bill 3613. Thanks.
Good afternoon. I'm dressed differently than most of you, but then again, everybody on Nike's campus usually is, so that's not out of the ordinary. I'm going to try to go through briefly sort of 4 general topics with respect to the discussion we're having here today. One is give you some sense of where Nike's business has come and where we find ourselves today. Secondly, then talk about what I think the future might hold for us and how the future might be somewhat different than the present. Third, talk about what the requirements are going to be for success for us in the future and how that relates to the discussion we're having about Oregon and the competitiveness of Oregon and succeeding in Oregon as a place to do business. And then I'll finally talk about how we stack up here in Portland and how Portland's health relates to and is interrelated with the problems and challenges and opportunities that we have at the state level as well. So first, how our business has changed. We have changed a lot. Nike is a company of extensions, basically. It started as a track and field running, spike company that basically did business in the western United States, but primarily in Oregon. It expanded to more running-related product, but focused on shoes, but then in the entire United States. And then through geographic extension and extension of products and different businesses and sports over time, we've changed obviously a lot. We've gone from being an athletic shoes company to essentially a footwear, apparel, and equipment company with everything from watches to golf clubs and golf balls and the like. We've gone from being an athletic product company to essentially being an athletic and active product company. The lines between athletic-related shoes, just as one example, and those that are not used for athletic purposes are increasingly becoming blurry. What I'm wearing today, for example, this is technically, we would call an athletic shoe. That's a technical stretch of the definition, right? I mean, I probably wouldn't do anything athletic in these shoes, although I probably could. The reality is we sell a lot of these kinds of things to people who have no intention whatsoever of ever playing any sport in them. And that's true of a lot of things that we do. The third change that we've seen is from being a domestic company to being a global company. The fiscal year that we just finished and announced our year-end and quarterly earnings yesterday to the street was the first fiscal year in our history in which our business outside of the United States was cumulatively larger than our business inside of the United States. And given our growth trends, there is no question that that gap will widen over time, that we will increasingly do more business outside of the U.S. than we do in the U.S. How we see those things changing in the future? Well, first of all of the things that I just stated will continue to occur. We will continue to diversify in terms of product types and likely services of different kinds. We will certainly see increased proliferation of competition. Our business has incredibly low barriers to entry. If you are basically, you can get into the athletic footwear business, just to give you one sense of, or a sense of one piece of our business. You can get into the athletic footwear business if you basically have a designer and a fax machine. And that's about all it takes. Because everything else you can buy. You can source the product somewhere else. You can hire distributors basically to sell it for you. You can, everything else you can outsource. And so it is an amazingly low barriers to entry business, and as a result, we've seen tremendous proliferation of competition. We don't think of our business as being a business against the Adidases and the Reeboks of the world as much as we once did. It's against thousands, literally, of companies that differ depending upon which piece of our business you're talking about. Shifting gears now and talking a little bit about success requirements. For us, a lot of what it takes for us to succeed is dependent upon our ability to attract and retain creative talent. Nike's a very right-brain company, and left-brainers like me are pretty rare around Nike's campus. That's okay, but it's a very right-brain-oriented company. And traditionally, we've been, I think, able to attract a lot of people to our organization because they were passionate about sport. They happened to be great creative minds, but they were also very, very passionate about sport. The more our business grows in non-sport dimensions, the more we're competing for people who would otherwise see their logical destinations for employment as being New York or San Francisco or perhaps Los Angeles. That's a different competitive profile than we normally would have to think of in terms of attracting those kinds of people. Secondly, I think another crucial thing for our success in the future is going to be the continued development of Portland as essentially a natural global living destination. What I'm not saying is that Portland needs to become a Paris or a London or a Hong Kong. But I am saying that Portland needs to be a place where people from around the world will feel comfortable living in just a really natural way, that it does not feel like a stretch to come live here. We've been reasonably successful in the past several years at transitioning our organization's management over to local management teams as opposed to U.S. expatriates that are running the business around the world. So that in Korea, our business is run by Koreans, and in Argentina, it's run by Argentines, and in Hong Kong, it's run by Chinese. That said, if we're going to really operate like a global company, we will always have a constant stream of people who are coming from those locations into our global headquarters here and working for some period of time and then likely moving back out again. So Portland's got to be a natural place where they feel comfortable coming to. That means a lot of things, I think. It means good air transport access. It means educational opportunities where the kids can perhaps receive most of the instruction in their native tongue. It includes having an international population that is large enough and diverse enough that they can feel at home here. And it means all the cultural and educational and other attractions that make for a vibrant community in the current global economy. How does Portland stack up in that regard? Turning to the final subject, I think we stack up actually reasonably good. It's this is a time of talking about our problems to a great degree as a state and as a city, but we also need to remind ourselves of the tremendous assets we have. Portland is a very, very nice place. That said, we do have some gaps, and we do have some big risks looking toward the future. Since I tend to work in strategic planning, I tend to think about competitive advantage. So I think about how do we create, essentially for the state of Oregon and for Portland specifically, competitive advantage so that we can, differentiate ourselves and have a place where business can prosper and flourish. Some competitive advantages we already have. Location is fantastic. Secondly, we have the advantages, I think, in Portland specifically, being both big and small. We have the cultural attractions, the restaurants, the diversity in a lot of respects of a large city, but we avoid many of the downsides. We don't have to, nearly as great a degree as other communities do, the transportation problems, although they are emerging and becoming more challenging. We don't have the crime problems that a lot of larger cities have. And we still have a sense very much of communities within a larger community. The suburbs here aren't suburbs. They're real places. Whereas in a lot of larger cities, you can call it what you want, but it's a piece of LA, for example. So this is we have the advantages of being both big and small here. Secondly, we have some fantastic natural assets. We've got, it may sound crazy to say that our weather's fantastic, but compared to people who live in Minnesota, our weather's fantastic. And it's very temperate, right? The summertime here is as beautiful as it can get, and the wintertime, as long as you don't mind the gloom, is pretty tolerable. Our recreation is fantastic. The proximity to both mountains and beach, and a completely different climate, essentially at a 2.5 hours drive away to get to the high desert, is pretty tremendous. And so we need to really be about creating and essentially recreating competitive advantage for ourselves. I'd focus just on a few things, I guess, in talking about that. One, we talk about education a lot. I just can't say enough how important I think we feel as Nike, and that I feel personally about education, quality of education as a competitive advantage for this community and for our state. There are some things we can't replicate and shouldn't try to replicate from other places. Education is something we should be able to excel at. And for people who are comparing that we might be trying to hire San Francisco or New York or Portland, there's no reason in the world why we shouldn't be able to be worlds apart in education, both from a competitive advantage perspective and just from the perspective of doing the right thing for us and our families. So education is crucial. A second one I would mention is air transportation. Scott talked about flight access. PDX has, unfortunately, since I first moved to Portland almost 4 years ago, gotten a little bit worse in terms of air access out of and into PDX. The facility is fantastic, but the flight routes that are available into and out of PDX are not what they need to be for us to really be competitive with people who want to live here and have easy access to travel to other destinations. Third, I would talk about, which is perhaps less than perfectly politically correct, but it's definitely part of the Oregon business plan, is road capacity. I don't think it's realistic to assume necessarily that we can solve transportation problems exclusively, or even to a majority, through alternate forms of transportation. The reality is, to a great degree, our future of transportation will still be through individual access transport, which, yes, will be bicycles to some degree and other types of means, but we're still going to spend a lot of time in cars. And my sense is, as evidenced, even by the drive at 11:15 in the morning today from Nike's campus in Beaverton to downtown here on Highway 26, it starts to feel like Southern California at 11:30 in the morning, and it doesn't need to. And that's something that we ought to be able to fix. A few call-outs on the Oregon business plan besides the ones I've mentioned already. Everybody talks about tax structure reform and stabilization. That is absolutely crucial. And then lastly, the economic development part, I think, of the Oregon business plan is also a crucial part of the equation. We do have to invest to get a return on that investment. The return doesn't come for free. And but I do think, I'm very optimistic because Oregon is such a fantastic place, and Portland specifically is such a great place that we've got the assets off which to build. And so shame on us if we don't. We ought to be able to do it. Thanks.
Good afternoon. Thank you for bringing somebody from the Mid-Willamette Valley up to the Portland City Club. I appreciate being brought up here today. The good thing, bad thing about talking at the end of presenters is that you either have a lot of material that's been covered extremely well, or you have little material that's been extremely well covered. In both cases, my previous speakers have done a phenomenal job. First of all, Curt, I want to thank you very much because you have now made my children into shoe specialists. Today, what I want to do today is really reflect from a small manufacturer's standpoint some realities that are happening within the Oregon economy, and particularly how they relate to the Oregon business plan. First of all, to give a little perspective, we are indeed a precision sheet metal manufacturing and assembly company, and what that specifically means is we manufacture the metal enclosures that house, for instance, Radisys technology. So while they build on the board, they've got to put it into something. So one of our clients, for instance, we manufacture major servers and support many, if not most, of the Oregon high-tech industry. Our company also is a model of what Oregon companies typically have been over the years. We are a family-held business, winning actually the Oregon as well as the National Family Business of the Year Award just a couple of years ago. We have grown, matured, nurtured, and changed with the Oregon economy as well. In 1957, we started our journey as a small little job shop in what actually appeared to be barns. In 60s, we kind of rounded the corner into trying to help support the food processing industry, which was, of course, very extensive in the mid-Willamette Valley at that point. And Jack Neilsen, our founder, actually worked with Oregon Fish and Wildlife, developing a line of proprietary products, which we no longer manufacture, supporting the handling and distribution of fish raised in the hydroelectric projects. 1970s, we went into power transformers and wood stoves, as we all remember, if we can remember back then. And 80s and 90s, certainly the growth of Oregon's high-tech environment. And so, in fact, Nielsen Manufacturing would have been about employee number 75 with Sequent Computer when it was here, and we wish they were back. 2001, we fell on our lips with the rest of the economy. I'm really not going to add many more comments to what Scott has said. The fact of the matter is, today, we are smaller because the world is smaller. What's changed for our company is this. We are indeed smaller today than we were as far as a revenue kind of an organization. I think you all need to understand why this has happened and what's happening now in this particular industry, because it relates to Oregon's challenges here. First of all, our particular industry was a highly fragmented, highly entrepreneurial, highly regional industry. As I just read a recent article, in the last 2 years, there are actually 30% less of us in the nation than there were just 2 short years ago. I will build on that in just a moment. The board manufacturers, the folks that actually build the electronics for much of the high technology, have really decided prior to this downturn to actually capture more value by reaching down into the chain and grabbing some of this fragmented industry, consolidating it up. Well, what happened was, on the back side of that, when the market turned, they closed all of those facilities. And Oregon has certainly had some repercussions of that. Consolidation has certainly had a lot to do with what's happened in our industry. Today, there's tremendous capacity in the industry, in our industry, to support worldwide demand. The other difficulty, however, is when this market shifted, as Scott mentioned, and as Curt actually, how many pairs of shoes, Curt, are manufactured in Oregon? Not very many. As Scott had mentioned, it has shifted to the different geographies where the labor cost is much less. The difficulty for us, however, is that we are a supporting industry of this. We are the folks that actually build the products that end up getting sold to the consumer. And from that standpoint, quite frankly, it's somewhat bleak out there today. Production, once lost for our kind of an industry, used to be something that we could capture back in a recovery. So, like my previous speakers have talked, yes, this is a recession. Yes, it will come back. I also agree that yes, it will be much different than it was before, because in the United States in total, there is a reality that has occurred, and that is standard work that many companies like ours have done for years and years and years, has not only been lost because of lack of demand, it has been transferred to other geographies around the world and is providing a 9+% increase to the Chinese economy, but ours will not recover. Ladies and gentlemen, these jobs are lost forever. Michael Marks, the CEO of Flextronics, one of these organizations that has really tried to deal with this global economy, in an article that I read some time ago, was talking about the cost of labor in China. And his comments were fascinating to me, because he said basically the cost of labor in China is a moot point. The reason it's a moot point is because at approximately 60 cents an hour in some of the rural regions of China, the Chinese workers are twice as productive. They work approximately 6 days a week because many of them are working within campuses. They are actually in the process of an industrial revolution similar to what we had many, many years ago. And in that process, you cannot compete. Labor is a moot point. And I see a head nod from Scott over here. Just our industry. I mentioned 30% less companies. Let me just transfer that over to you for a couple statistics. That's approximately 3,000 companies. If I assume approximately 50 employees per company, which is a little low, that's 150,000 jobs. If I figure that as an economic engine, the manufacturing arm, whether it be Nielsen Manufacturing, quite frankly, if it would be the Sequence or the Nikes or so forth, that engine has the ability to create about a 1-to-8 relationship. One job in manufacturing creating approximately 8 jobs in the economy. Do the math. The fuel that you lose by these 3,000 companies is approximately 1.2 million full-paying, wage-earning jobs for our economy. So how are we going to move forward? First of all, I think that one of the reasons that I certainly support the Oregon Business Plan is I think as a region, we've got to kind of wake up, and that includes our organization as well. We have not focused on the policy that allows and attracts organizations to this state. We have loved our livability. We have enjoyed certainly the fruits, but I quite frankly think that Oregon has sat on their laurels for too long, and I put myself in that same category. At a policy level then, somehow, and I think the Oregon Business Plan, if you read the outline, you will see this, we have to start thinking of how we are going to build a success of Oregon businesses and not look at business as being a funder necessarily of public programs. That's a big philosophical change, quite frankly, from what we've seen in the past. Nationally, I believe, and I think that we can help from a regional basis as well, we have to somehow level some of the monetary playing field that's occurring out there from an international monetary standpoint. And we hope, and we'll probably pray, that that will be done soon. We need policies that will allow the import and export that the previous speakers have spoken about both ways. We have to be able to take Oregon's products and put them into economies, as well as have the ability to export things out of those economies to bring back into our own. We need serious review of regulatory issues to the new development, investment, and attraction to our state. Both Curt and Scott, I think, have spoken very, very well to this. Let me give you a slight example, though. I was asked to participate in a process down in Salem for regulatory streamlining last Friday. So I had all of the regulators of our industry, literally all of the regulators for our industry, sitting around a table, and our case study was how could our company put together a 10,000 square foot expansion to grow our organization. We went through an exercise all day, and I had two comments that came across the table that actually shocked me. One was, why in the world would you ever want to expand? The other comment was, boy, I'm glad I work for government. Ladies and gentlemen, that's a problem. They feel it, the folks in state government, as much as you and I. So let me give you a couple of realities that we're facing. U.S. manufacturing, specific to our industry, cannot compete against world labor centers. We cannot. We can innovate, we can push production, and we can indeed be the fuel that acts as a jumping board off to some of these other economies. And that's where we can participate with companies such as Radisys. I need to ask that businesses take a hard look at what is the economic impact of chasing margin. From strictly a financial standpoint, in our business alone, our content in many of the products that we build is oftentimes less than 5% of the content of the product. Yet most of our customers are looking actively to wanting to displace manufacturing to China. I think corporate America needs to wake up a little bit, folks. They need to think about this displacement and what happens to that economic engine. Finally, I think that the policy will not change unless we collectively can take a more active role. And I think business has been a bit passive in this regard. I compliment what's been going on with the Oregon Business Plan. We will certainly start to, or try to remain a part of the process, adding our perspectives and hopefully changing the path of Oregon. Finally, we have to have accountability. And I think this program has that. If you choose to be involved, you have a way to check its accountability. Thank you.
Thank you. One benefit of being a City Club member is having the privilege to ask questions of our speakers. Our first question today, though, will come from our board host, Gwen Milius, who's a partner in Stevie & Milius. And while she's speaking, if others would line up behind the microphones and be ready to ask your question. And when it's your turn, please ask your question in 30 seconds. Thanks.
Yesterday, I saw a bumper sticker that said, "Keep Portland weird." The bumper sticker might be the ultimate paraphrase of economist Richard Florida's advice to cities that want to foster economic growth based on innovation. In his book, The Rise of the Creative Class, Florida links healthy arts and counterculture communities to the kind of creative entrepreneurial thinking that launches corporate dynasties. I want to ask our panelists if they agree with Florida's views, and if so, what do you recommend that the business community can do to foster a strengthened creative culture in Portland and the state? Or to paraphrase Curt, what can the left brains be doing to help foster the right?
Will the representative from Nike please handle that?
I think that what makes this state and the Portland area unique. First of all, I do agree that generally the kind of diversity that Florida advocates be the case in terms of living environment is crucial to a successful creative environment as well. So I believe that he is correct. What I would say, though, is that there are a lot of places in this country where those kinds of conditions exist. So how do you make our place here different? Well, there are certain things that are natural assets, but one thing that I would say that really does help us is that those creative people who do have families and are trying to raise families, Portland is a lot more attractive place intrinsically than a San Francisco or a New York or anywhere else that they might think about living, where the creative culture is very, very strong. So I think for us to give up at all on those characteristics that allow us to maintain an edge in terms of a place to raise families would be suicidal. We've got to keep the investment up in those areas, most particularly education.
Hi, Chris Smith, City Club member. I'm going to ask you the same question I asked our speaker last week, who was County Chair Diane Lynn, and she spoke about the Multnomah County business income tax and the need to revamp that to make it less of a competitive disadvantage or disincentive to economic development in Multnomah County. So the question I'm going to pose to you is, given that you've identified tax policy as an issue and certainly revenue stability in Oregon is an issue, what kind of tax policy do we need towards business so that business can fairly pay for the government services they receive, yet not at the same time create competitive disadvantage for the state or regions within the state?
Well, that's certainly an easy question to answer. I don't know. I think businesses need to feel to step up and be a part of the funding of things. And probably stability is as important as anything. What are we working with? Competition from surrounding areas is important, but maybe not as important as you might think. A little difference, yes, has some advantages, but one of the things I think is important is how quickly an organization can move itself. And we're tempted to move ourselves because the product life cycle is so short, and the investment can be huge and become outdated quickly. And so, particularly, I'm almost speaking for a manufacturing company, but as that product cycle becomes shorter, the next plant can be built any place and quickly. And if I want to generate a ton of mail, and any CEO would be the same way, is give a hint that you might be interested in moving your company. And you'll just find out a tremendous interest and pursuit that builds. So I think fair treatment, involvement, and stability. But I think most business people want to live in an environment that's healthy and prosperous, and have employees that are happy in that environment and want to come to that environment. And the tax policy is important, but maybe not as important as the benefits derived from spending that money appropriately. One of we have a 5th P. I don't think we have it there, and that's basically public finance. The business community is exceptionally concerned about public finance, and we are doing a lot to try to work on it. And I think most of it is not bottom line oriented for our companies or ourselves. It's for how can we make Oregon prosper and grow, and taking a very balanced viewpoint towards it, I think.
The only thing I would add, we're the most dependent on income tax of any state in the country. I think the figure is 74% of our revenue comes from income tax. So I think it was really the initiative of the Oregon Business Plan that got business leaders to swallow, I'll use that term, that we really had to consider a consumption tax. And if the voters don't have the courage to do it, maybe the legislature must. And that consumption tax can, eliminate a whole lot of essentials of daily life that would be burdensome on people. But we just are completely dependent on income tax, and without a rainy day fund paying the piper, that we're riding high in the good times and crashing bad in the bad times, and that's the stability comment I think Ron was getting at. So the consumption tax, and maybe also dedicating a bit of capital gains, which only comes in during the good times, to what our governor proposed, which I thought was brilliant, in a sort of a school scholarship fund, then at least in 20 years that would be built into something sizable. So it's all about kind of looking at this over 20 years instead of 20 minutes.
I just wanted to interject that we've left a copy of the City Club's tax reform study with each member of our panel today, because City Club has looked into this issue about a year ago, and I think any of you who are interested in it should get a hold of that study and review what it recommends. Anyway, next question.
Okay. I have a couple of questions. Is that okay? Is the line too long for that?
We have about 3 minutes or so.
Oh. Well,
one question.
I'll be real quick then. Nike, everything I read in the paper has to do with $90 million. You're getting this guy, and it's an amazing thing. In a nutshell, you're also getting the former state epidemiologist who ran the bioterrorism program here and was deputy director of CDC, coming to work for Lisa, social responsibility, biggest thing there can be. I come from New York. I was working on social responsibility 30 years ago. They said there was going to be a cultural lag, but hey, I would like to see companies like Nike and a lot of companies in the Portland area push their social responsibility areas, because I think that's so exciting, and I think companies around bring business in, hey, that's a way.
Yeah, absolutely agree. We've, I think for several years now, taken the social responsibility agenda of the company very seriously. And I can say certainly from a strategic planning perspective, the discussion about the direction we take in social responsibility and how robust that agenda is a part of every strategy discussion we have. Increasingly, I think around the world, consumers are spending their money in part based upon their judgment of how responsible the company is that they're planning to give their money to. So it's also a self-interest thing, I think, as consumer behavior changes. We've had the difficulty this past year and affirmed as of yesterday, unfortunately, to not be able to talk about it very much because of the Caskey case in the state of California. So hopefully that will get liberalized at some point so that the dialogue that happens between the public and the corporations regarding these issues can be wide open as it needs to be.
Can I go to the end of the line?
Yeah, could we have the next speaker behind you? I think this will have to be the last question.
Scott Maxwell, I'm a City Club member. I wanted to ask, I had noticed in your plan, which I took the liberty of downloading, that you talked about redirecting the emphasis of Oregon's community, economic and community development department. And I wondered if one of you could take just a brief moment to elaborate a little bit on that, and maybe were there ways that department was lacking in your eyes? And I don't know who to address that to.
I'll jump in on this one. I think maybe a sign of the times. In our plentiful years of the 90s, the department was highly oriented toward regional development. I would not call that economic development, I'd call it regional development, sidewalks, sewer systems, infrastructure, and that maybe was a reasonable thing. But it didn't build companies, and it didn't build sustainability, it didn't build jobs, except during that period of time. And so I think that one of the main emphases, depending upon what kind of budget it comes through with, and that budget's under siege, is reorienting it toward job creation. And job creation around clusters where we have momentum, where we have good underlying technology or good underlying excellence that drives those clusters. And that's what it should be. So between Marty Brantley and Jack Isselman, I'm really bullish about what they can do if they're given the resources by the legislature that they deserve.
This is a very provocative panel, and I think those of you who'd like to ask questions, I'd suggest that you stay on, and perhaps some of the panel members might be willing to speak with you one-on-one, but we've run out of time. And I just want to say in conclusion that although over the years we've heard a lot about how the consolidation of businesses has meant that we've lost corporate headquarters and we've lost perhaps a sense of the commitment to Oregon from the business community, but I think today's program demonstrates that that's not the whole story, and the Oregon Business Plan represents the kind of collaborative effort that can be a model for the rest of the state. Thanks to our panel, and the City Club is adjourned.